Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Beyond the Letter. I got an intro here because today is a special day. We just finished wrapping up with the one and only Ruslan, the incredible, talented, gifted rapper, poet, artist, entrepreneur, podcaster, everything. You probably have seen him at some point on your For You page through his podcast. And so we've honored that he made the trek up. We're not too far from him, but he joined us today. And so we've just finished. So we had an incredible conversation just about his life, his influence, what God has done over the past 5 or 6 years with his rise of really having, he's always really been an incredible influencer, but in this space of podcast and multimedia in the world that we would see today is seeing a rise of Christians having more influence. So we talked about all those things. And then we ended by talking about an incredible conference he has coming up at the end of March. So stay tuned for the end to hear about that. But if you don't get to the end, you can go to blessgodsummit.com. He has an incredible conference coming up with incredible speakers. You can go to the website. You can see just how many speakers they have. We talk about it at the very end. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into a conversation with the one and only Ruslan. All right, everybody, welcome to Beyond the Letter. A little different pace. Sometimes we do interviews like this or more. It's still conversation style is the podcast, but we got the one and only Ruslan in the house.
Thank you for having me. You guys
thanks
got
for coming.
A great studio here, man. It's beautiful.
Thank you
cool
so
stuff.
much. I appreciate that. We've done, like I just told you a second ago, you were a big inspiration early on. We were seeing what you were doing, saw the quality you were doing. The Christian Joe Rogan.
You took it to a whole nother level because this is a gorgeous setup. They can't see behind the camera, but this is really nice.
Yeah, and that's part of my background is I produced podcasts back in the day.
Oh, okay.
For people.
You got the cheat
I had
code.
a media company. Yeah.
You got the cheat code.
Now I'm just pastoring and preaching, but I had to give it up. Not had to, but it was important to give up because I was working with a lot of like high profile kind of individuals.
In terms of the agency side.
Yeah, in terms of my agency, it was just pulling too much.
Okay. And then you're building your own though.
So then we ended up building my own, and that was always a long conflict for me, which was I did it, and I don't know if you've ever had conflict with this, whether it be through your music, and I will get into it introduction-wise and stuff like that, but it's like, how do I take what I naturally know or have naturally done on a career side, maybe not faith space, but then now it almost felt like insincere to say, I'm going to take it into the church, and I'm going to, everything I've done for individuals, I'm going to do it either not really for myself, but for my church, but it always felt like, but is it authentic? Am I just doing it because I know how to do it, or is it because, and I feel like it was a couple years ago that I felt like God gave me the green light that was like, you could do this without,
So how interconnected is it with the church?
It's pretty much connected. So our Patriot Church, they view it as their podcast.
Okay.
We share our numbers with our church.
Okay.
We share testimonials with our church.
Okay.
And so one of the things we've set out with Beyond the Letters, we want it to be a front door to faith. And so I didn't want it totally branded. Like people would have to actually search on the Beyond the Letter side to find out who our church is, because I didn't want it to be this outright like, hey, it's just we're pulling an okey doke. We're doing this thing, and then it's just to get you into church. Like, in terms of our church, I wanted something that other pastors would say, hey, someone came and checked out my church because they would listen to your podcast.
Yeah. Now, do you guys like go deeper on whatever the Sunday morning talk is? And
no,
it's totally different than that.
No, it's totally different. We don't. There may be subtle references like, oh yeah, we just talked about this last Sunday, but it isn't a hey, go to Beyond the Letter if you want to follow up on this sermon or whatever. It's really lifestyle based. So we talk about everything. Sure. We talk about what's going on in the world around us, culture, Christian culture, non-Christian culture. Very similar to what you're doing, but obviously you have found this really incredible platform, and you're using a lot of things to communicate with each other, and you've been doing it for a very long time. And from what I've known, seeing it over the years, as you're talking to the camera, ours is more so round table. We're talking to each other, and we're welcoming people into kind of the conversation. And so I've heard like feedback from people to say, hey, you're my friends I've never had. And so that cool. Really, like, that's kind of like, if that kind of boils down Beyond the Letter, that's what it is.
Now, what about people checking out Beyond the Letter and then actually making it to church here? How often does that happen?
It's about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 person gets this podcast as a first connection to coming to the church.
Here.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'll meet people who say, they won't mention like someone sent me your sermon. They'll say, hey, stuff goes viral pretty fairly often. So either you went viral About 2 months ago, this young guy in his 30s came up to me. He's like, "So you got me here?" I'm like, "What does that mean?" And he's like, "Well, your videos came up like 7 times on my For You page."
Okay.
And I was finally like, I got to find a church nearby. And he's
Okay.
like, turns out you were 15 minutes
Wow.
away from where I was at. And so,
If you had to quantify how many people have checked out the church, not became members, but just checked out the church because of the podcast.
oh man, hundreds.
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 That's great.
It's about it's a 2.5-year-old podcast now, a little younger than that, about over 2 years.
Yep.
And it would be over hundreds.
Okay.
Because we're asking, like, you come join the church. How do you find out?
Yep.
There's at least 10 to 20 people each time that's like either between me and my wife's marriage one or this one. A friend sent me this, got me really interested in faith, and then they invited me to church, and then I wanted to come.
That's it.
You know, because that's what we're talking about. We're like, what is a Christian response to anything?
Right.
That's kind of
Right.
the purpose of the podcast. So
That's fat. Yeah, that's incredible.
I've told every pastor they should have their own version of what it is. I'm more conversational in general, so I enjoy talking with people, even people that don't think like me. So that's kind of the premise of it. You know, Apostle Paul says to the Corinthian church, "You are the letter written on my heart by the way that you live." So that's why it's called Beyond the Letter. It's beyond the scriptures. As we read the scriptures, we want our lives to reflect what the Word of God says, not necessarily just quoting the Word every day, everywhere we go. You know.
Yeah. I'm curious because we're talking at my church about doing something similar specifically from the church, but we've always seen it as like a can it go deeper on the talk? Because most pastors have extra stuff that they haven't worked into the talk, you know, in terms of material.
Yeah.
And so can we connect culture to whatever the talk was in the Sunday morning that didn't? So then it serves as a utility to the church as well as an outreach arm of the church.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be interested if that ends up working. I know a lot of pastors, that's the first thing they lead off of. Is like, oh, well, I got more in the tank from Sunday. Let's talk about that. But like I've found that, you know, and right now probably 50% of our church, because we kind of regrew through COVID, 50% of our church was unchurched before they even came to our church.
Okay.
So we don't really have, right now half are not church transfers, they're not church hoppers, they're people that have never been to church in their life.
Got it.
And so they're engaging with more of this conversation because we're talking about what does it look like to live together and not be married? Like what kind of hurdles are you going to find? And people are like, oh, that's me. I'm going through that right now. Or we're talking about whatever else in culture and society that everyone's talking about at work.
Yep.
And, you know, no one's at work going like, hey, did you read Galatians chapter 2 this week? Unless it's another Christian, you know, so that's great. And that's a critical component. But for me, I really wanted a wide reach to the unchurched people. And so I'll get texts from friends that are like, hey, someone joined my church this weekend. I asked them what got them interested in church, and they'll show me a podcast. And they would show our podcast and be like, these guys got me thinking about church.
That's fire.
And the pastor would be like, they don't even know. They didn't know I know you, you know, so.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Great job.
But thank you, bro.
Yeah.
Thank you. So for you, born in Baku, Azerbaijan, then came to the United States. An opportunity in 2018 to go to Azerbaijan.
Okay.
Oddly enough, the president invited me.
Send my regards, because I'm not allowed to go.
They wouldn't let you back in.
Ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
Of like the realest sense. Yeah, like flat out, like they just displaced 100,000 Armenians at the end of 2023. Armenian Christians from Azerbaijan.
So is that what your family was? Armenian Christian?
We're ethnically Armenian. My mother's adopted by an Armenian family, and my dad's fully Armenian. And Armenians in Baku are slightly different. It's not going to be like an Armenian you met in Glendale. You know what I mean? Like the culture is a little different. And so, because of that conflicted Nagorno-Karabakh region on the eastern side of Azerbaijan.
Yep.
And it's like this autonomous Armenian area. They just displaced the last bit of Armenians from the country, right? Like 3 weeks before October 7th. So there's 100,000 people ethnically cleansed.
Man.
And nobody talked about it.
Yeah.
Nobody. There was no press about it. You know.
Yeah.
And then they just banned the BBC. Azerbaijan just banned the BBC. Yeah. So or one of the. I think it's the BBC. It's one of a massive news organization that cannot do news in the country anymore. And so So
about how old were you when you?
I was 6 when I came over here. So I think we left. I don't know. We went to Moscow for a little bit. I don't know the exact timeline, but I was 6 when I got here. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speak on that same regard. So what happened with me was I caught on. I was there for about a week. I was invited. We were invited for this like symposium for Muslims, but it was about like Jewish relations with the government, some of the Azerbaijani Jewish people there and stuff like that. And so they invited like some American Christian pastors basically to like peace offering conversations. The ambassador of Israel was there from the United States. It was a whole thing. And then I was the millennial representative. So everybody was like 40, 50, 60. I was the guy at the time in my 20s. And within the first day, I kind of realized, oh no, I think I made a mistake. I think I said yes to the wrong thing because they started taking us to the graves of like generals who fought in the Armenian War. And we were like putting flowers. Like we don't speak their language. So they were just like, hey, we're going to take photos. We're going to be on the news. And then we're going to give you roses. And then you're going to put roses on these things. And then I start realizing like, well, I'm not doing that anymore. Relatively quickly, I'm like, however the rest of this trip is, I'm not going to stand in any of this media stuff. And then I go to my hotel later on and recognize that like they have control of like the news sources and everything that I was like, I think I just made a mistake. And kind of from there got really quiet and didn't involve in much and went to the symposium.
You were on a propaganda trip. You didn't know it.
That's exactly what it was. And like I researched stuff on the front end a little bit, but it's totally different when you get there now because they're kind of controlling.
They want to present themselves as this like enlightened secular Muslim nation.
Yeah.
And they're not. Like it's authoritarian. Like
for sure.
They're wild and they are like, you know, bona fide documents. The thing about the Gaza situation is so funny, not funny, sad, is that people are upset about Gaza and like this just happened and there were no protests, there were no college students upset not about the possibility of ethnic cleansing. Trump saying we're going to get people out of Gaza and clean it up. No. Look, 100,000 Armenian Christians were ethnically cleansed from Azerbaijan in 2023 and minimal news coverage about it.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because they're Christian? Do you think it's because they control their own media on the inside? Like, why do you think we take a big deal in one area, but then something relatively, or even, what was it, the 70 Christians who were beheaded
in the Congo?
In the Congo, like, do you think it's Christian related, or do you think it's something else?
I mean, apathy is a hell of a drug, right? You can't be concerned with things that you're detached from. And so Armenia and Armenians in general are not the most powerful country without, not a ton of influence, not a ton of geopolitical value in the region. Whereas like if it happens to Israel is a very strategic ally there. Armenia is not. It's right in between Turkey and Azerbaijan. And so I think one, just like from a pragmatic standpoint, Armenia is not a strategic ally at all. Two, I think the Armenian plight isn't as well recognized outside of like the Armenian genocide just starting to kind of get some traction. Like America just recognized the Armenian genocide a couple years ago. It just hasn't gotten a ton of traction. And so I think that's a component to it. And they don't fit the quintessential minority. Like Palestinians, there's a story there that's intriguing and for bleeding heart liberals, it's the perfect story. Whereas like Armenia doesn't have this story. Unless you're a Christian and you're educated on Christian history, church history, then you get like the earliest Christian nation and the Apostle Bartholomew and Thaddeus are, in Armenia planting churches. It has a rich history, and I think most people are just ignorant of it, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, that makes complete sense. We whoever's what seems to be the bully on the yard is kind of easiest to kind of go after,
right?
Which makes sense. It's just it's always crazy, and even I have a lot of friends that are extremely involved in Israel and very pro-Israel in that sense, and it's just always interesting how we approach things because they'll be like the 70 beheadings with Christians who are our own kind, and then they'll kind of be crickets on that, but then they're loud on something else that really doesn't seem to have anything to do with our Christian faith. It does in some ways, but in other ways it doesn't, other than that. And then you're just like, what's someone's logic on what they're picking and choosing to be upset about? If injustice is injustice, then, You know, why don't you stand on that podium?
There's not a ton of logic and consistency on many of these things. It's I don't mean to be shallow, but a lot of it is like what's trendy and what's in the zeitgeist, and less about what's actual injustice right before your very eyes. And the media that's going to play into that as well isn't going to give it its fair share, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, how long have you been podcasting for?
I'd started dabbling. There was a couple early Dream Junkies podcasts, so 2015, maybe 2016. Kind of dabbling around the same time as the Casey Neistat vlogging era. But I didn't really find my pocket probably until the end of 2018. 2019 is when I posted a clip a day in terms of just doing my rap shows and then setting up cameras in the green room and just interviewing my friends and running the video switcher myself, running the audio myself. So 2019 is when I really, really found my pocket. And then I kind of stopped when the channel took off in 2020. And then I came back around to it in 2022, and that's probably the most recent iteration of it. It's 2022.
Okay.
Consistently.
When did it for you become at least from what I can tell, is it became not only just a brand for you, but also part of your living? Was that relatively early on, or were you oh, this is doing really well, 2020, I can really start to put more energy that this is actually going to be able to allow me to sustain my life?
It wasn't until the end of 2020 when my YouTube channel blew up, but it didn't blow up for podcasting. I kind of had to understand how attention worked and what worked in the YouTube sphere. And so it's once I got the YouTube to pop for more cultural commentary and that sort of stuff, then I came back to the podcasting 2022, the end of 2022.
Yeah.
So 2020 is when the YouTube took off, and then that replaced my music income. And because I still had my music income, I brought on Zach at the beginning of 2021, and then that's when stuff kind of compounded pretty quick.
Yeah. So when you are pretty relatively on, because for those that don't know, listen to this podcast, me and Ruslan aren't too far from each other, in terms of distance. Mm-hmm. When you were a rapper, you actually one time rapped here back when I was a youth pastor.
Oddly enough,
and so you even came on site trying to remember the whole space and everything. And so we had Dream Junkies, which was you, Belief, and who else was it?
John Gibbs.
Yep. That's right. And so Belief has somewhat, not the exact same strain, but kind of went in the same stream, though, of kind of a digital presence and influencer now, I think it is. And so
he kind of leaned into the fatherhood niche pretty heavy, the family vlogging. And so he's been at that. His channel probably popped right around the same time as Dream Junkies.
Okay.
So 2017, 2018.
Yeah, I felt like it was he was pretty early on when I saw him doing that. I'm like, man, he's on top of this.
He popped off pretty quick. Once he found that pocket and he understood what his value proposition was, it took off pretty quick for him.
So you've been doing it now pretty consistent, 5-6 years. Mm-hmm. I remember those days early on, and even kind of into 2021, 2022, some of your stuff, because where I'm pulling this from is I had seen your podcast with Lecrae, where you kind of talked about how it's I've made some changes to what I talk about now. Don't go too heavy on too many pastors anymore and all that stuff. And I remember 2021, 2022, you would kind of more consistently kind of go a little more harder on individuals and you said, oh, I kind of changed with that. If you could go back today, be I'm gonna start over. What are some things, one or two things that you think, man, I probably wouldn't do this, and maybe I'd lean more into this right here?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. In God's goodness, it all worked out. So I don't know if I would do anything different per se. I think there was a moment where I could have slid into that discernment ministry. Every pastor is wrong. Big church is bad church. Yeah. And I'm glad I didn't. And oddly enough, it was relationships from bigger pastors that didn't lead me down that path. So I'll give you an example. Pastor Greg Laurie reached out and offered to come on my channel right as we were launching the podcast in 2022. And I think having access to a Pastor Greg Laurie, having access to a Pastor Chris Brown at North Coast Church came on around the same time. I discovered that what was happening, and this is very tricky because our brains don't quite know the differences. You hear a terrible story, right? Yep. So you hear about, I'll use football as an example, the Raiders, right? Yep. And Raiders fans could be rowdy. So you hear a crazy story about some dude getting jumped at a Raiders game, and you hear another story of some guys in the hood, and they were wearing all Raiders apparel, and they got and they jumped this guy.
Yeah.
And then this guy was at a game and he got jumped in his own home arena. And you start hearing these things, and it's very easy to piece that together and be like, oh, yeah, Raiders fans are just bad, and the whole organization's bad, and they're corrupt, and how did they let this happen, right?
Yeah.
But that is such a low effort level of thinking that once you then meet someone who plays for the Raiders, and you meet the coach, and you meet the owners, and you meet other fans, you go, oh, wait, no, these are the crazies.
Yeah.
These are the minority of the situations, right? And then again, imagine if there were other creators who all they did was expose how bad the Raiders were because of these crazy fights that were happening, right?
Yeah.
And I think the church world is similar. I think the church world, there's bad stuff that happens.
For sure.
There's awful, terrible things that happen. There's bad pastors. There's pastors that are either full-on basking in heresy or they're right on the line.
Yeah.
But our brains will go to the most crazy fringe train wreck of a situation. And I think it's difficult to then disconnect and go, well, wait a minute, no, that's not all pastors. That's not all church. And the only way I know of how to combat that, and the way it worked in me, was that I started getting exposed to other pastors that were massive leaders of massive churches, and they were nothing like the people that were falling and sinning and harming people. And that, since having access to people like that, that is what I've been trying to platform. Big church isn't bad. Just because something is successful doesn't mean Satan is behind it. And let's talk to pastors who really love Jesus, really love their people, don't have any skeletons in their closet. And let's platform those voices to kind of try and offer a different perspective of the capital C church.
Yeah.
Because what works in content isn't what works in building your soul up. What works in content is if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
So find stuff that people are bleeding and talk about that. And that's going to be the things that go the most viral.
Yeah.
That's not a sustainable way to build people up.
Yeah.
Like if you're just telling them, look how bad these guys are. And so we made an intentional pivot.
Did you find yourself going in that direction at one point and think like, oh, I got to course correct? Or did you, or you just kind of started just building better boundaries and barriers? Or did you find out, like, because I know the way it works with social media, and I could see, like, I'm a pastor first, so Beyond the Letter, it's a minute, like we talked about, it's a ministry of our church, so it's not necessarily something that I make my living off of. And if I did, I feel like it would be, and still we want to reach people and be successful and best at what we do, and so you could find yourself like, oh, that really hit. I want to talk about that more, but that could actually be someone's pain point. Yep. And you have to almost be conscious of where to ride. And I always give this example on this podcast. Years ago when I started this with one of my other brothers. And there was one particular episode that I felt like we were just bullies towards the LGBTQ community. You know, like we're biblically conservative, we're fundamentalists in every way in that direction on gender, sexuality. But it was just an episode that it was in the height of a Pride Month in June, and it was like everything was on the table, right? Yeah. Target, it's and when we were done hitting record, we looked at each other and was like, you kind of feel gross? I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel gross. And we're like, yeah, we're not going to edit that episode. Yeah. Like, let's just, and so, but would it have gotten views? Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff in there that would have gone viral potentially and had all the right recipe of what we know bleeds and what we know what. Yeah. So it's like, over the years, are there any episodes that you were just like, well, I know you go live with your Patreon, right? So it'd be harder, but is there certain stuff that you're like, even maybe for editing to put something on social media, you're like, I'm not doing that because I don't really like how I went there with that? Yeah,
I would answer yes. I would say there's a graveyard of videos that we have taken down or were up briefly, and then we found out additional information took down. This is how this happens, though. For me, I can't speak for everybody. For me, it starts like this. It starts with someone we all loved and admired falls. My audience goes, how do we process this? This is what everyone is talking about. So we process this collectively and we talk about it. And then what happens is someone else falls, and then someone else falls. And then before you know it, these are the videos that are working. And you're like, yeah, but I just can't keep talking about this. I have to find a different thing, because then we're just sitting and we're being cathartic and just looking at
talking about the same thing over and over again, just different person.
And it's not edifying.
Yeah.
Again, I think there is a time and a place to help people process their church issues and their traumas, and I think there's a time and a place for that. But I think if all you're doing is it's not going to be healthy long term. And so, yeah, there are some things that I'm still passionate about. There are some things that I'll still speak out against, but I'm not going to make that the thing that I'm known for. I don't want to be the known for as the church call out guy. I don't think that's edifying. But there are things that when they do happen, I will speak on it. And the part that people don't know is a lot of times, I've been a fairly public person for a while. My Instagram has been decent size for a while. So before I've ever spoken on almost any pastor, I've always reached out to them privately. I've always made an effort to say, hey, man, do you want to talk about this? Do you want to give your side of the story? And of course, like, no one ever responds to those DMs, you know. But there's a long list of DMs and reach outs that I've done that people just they don't want to engage. Yeah. And then so like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, if you're the guy that's always going viral for something goofy from the pulpit, and people are trying to talk to you about it, and you never want to lean into the hard conversations, well, guess what? Like, the people are asking, how do we process this? How do we think about this? Yeah. But it is very easy to slide into that. And so yeah, we've I'd say the end of 2022, the end of 2022. We were like, okay, we're going to find a different strategy. And in 2023, that's when I was like, Easter 2023, I was like, okay, no more Mike Todd videos. We're not talking about Mike Todd anymore. Because I think that it's a symbiotic relationship. I think someone like that knows they're going viral and likes.
Almost all press is good press type of thing.
And so then it becomes a symbiotic, I'm going to do something that's edgy and controversial. A segment of the internet's going to freak out. Yeah. But ultimately, it just boosts me in the algorithms because people were now talking about me. Yeah. And so I just went, I'm just not even going to engage with this anymore. Like, I'm done. I'm not talking about anything Mike Todd related. And then I'd say like, so about 2 years ago, that was like a pretty hard cutoff for me. Yeah. And so there's still stuff here and there. Usually now it's if someone goes after my friends. Like, I think Mike Winger is a guy that does that really well. And if Joel Osteen goes after Mike Winger, even though I have mutual friends with Joel Osteen, like, I'm going to defend Mike Winger no matter what. If someone goes after my friends, I'll step up. Or Benny Hinn tried to take down Mike Winger, and I'm like, this is silly. Like, what are you doing? So there'll be stuff like that.
Man, maybe I'll be under a rock. Who's Mike Winger? I don't know.
You don't know who Mike Winger is?
No.
Oh man, that's funny.
I feel like I'm pretty aware. But
Mike. Yeah.
Am I out of it, Gabe? Or do you guys not know?
None of you guys know who Mike Winger is?
Yeah. Do you know Sammy?
We're in different worlds.
What is going on?
Mike Winger is he was a Calvary Chapel pastor. He has a pretty good big YouTube channel. He's a good friend of mine, and so he does.
No way.
Primarily does Bible teaching. Primarily,
which is a Calvary thing to do.
Yes. So he has like an 11-hour video. I'm not exaggerating. An 11-hour video about women in ministry. A part of a series of probably 30 hours of content about like everything that the Bible says, from the egalitarian position to the hierarchical position to the patriarchal position, like everything. That's just kind of what he does. Yeah. But then there'll be times where he'll lean into a sermon review of Joel Osteen or a Benny Hinn thing, and stuff like that. And he's always the most gracious and the most gentle and very. If there's a way to do that sort of content, I would say Mike Winger is the gold standard. Yeah. And unfortunately for him, like, there's been legal threats from the people I just named. Osteen, Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn tried to get the videos taken down, and YouTube, which this never happens, YouTube was like, no, you're wrong. Wow. Mike has the right to react to your videos and to do these analyses. No way. And I've never seen YouTube stand with a YouTuber and tell the other person trying to file these copyright strikes to go kick rocks. Which to me, like, you just look like you're guilty. You know, like, you look like you're guilty. And so, so as of late, it'd be more like defending a friend of mine than like trying to figure out what mega church pastor has done something goofy this week. I don't care to make content like
I gotta look him up then, because I know like Skip Heitzig in that world and all that kind of stuff in terms of the Calvary world of doing like good digital ministry in some of those ways, but I'll have to look into them. Yep. For you, when you took a shift that you were like, you said, okay, I'm not going to talk about Mike Todd anymore or do this anymore, pastors. I'm seeing, like, you're one of the first in the sense of what you're doing digitally, that you have a pretty good temperature with the people that listen, because you have Patreon that goes alongside of it. And so have you felt like, are there any people kind of that you can tell through Patreon and stuff, that kind of faithful fans, they they've articulated, hey, I like what you were doing before, or what's going on? I'm actually not happy anymore. Now that it seems like you're sympathetic to the big guy now, being a mega church, but like, what's going on? Like, do you hear any of that? And when you hear that kind of criticism and upset, like, are you good at brushing it off?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are people I have relationships with, and they have my ear, whether that's through Patreon, through Instagram. Sometimes people I end up meeting in real life and we exchange numbers. And yes, but seldom is it like that. Like, seldom is it like, hey man, you used to talk about X, Y, and Z with these and you don't talk about that anymore. Why? Like, it's seldom like that.
Yeah.
It'll be more like friends of mine. Like, I just reacted to Mike Signorelli with Carl Lentz, and I thought they had a great conversation about the balance between mental health and the demonic, and like, when is it deliverance, when is it mental health related, right? And I was like, man, this is great, because if anyone's keeping up with the deliverance world, like, man, they're kind of flippant with not caring about mental health and pretending like anxiety and depression aren't real, or that it's only spiritual, it's only demons. And so for Mike Signorelli, who's really deep in that world, to come out and be like, no, like, it's cruel to tell people that it's a demon when it's their mental health. And it's not helpful. So I highlighted that. I highlighted that conversation. And so that conversation was more like, why do you keep platforming Mike Signorelli? He's a deliverance minister. Carl Lentz disqualified himself. He has no value to add. And so it'll be like that, sort of like my friends who I'm not going to throw under the bus.
Right.
Though I disagree with publicly on a plethora of topics, those would be the situations that get people like kind of upset.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you friends with so-and-so? It's the guilty by association fallacy.
Yeah.
It's like, you think that because I'm friends with someone that I therefore believe all the same things.
And we agree on everything.
And it's like, we have a backlog of multiple videos of us publicly disagreeing on things. Perhaps we are grown up enough to say we publicly disagree on these things, but in the grand scheme of things, we're still friends, and we can have a disagreement but still be solid as friends.
Since your stuff reacts a lot of times to like statements, controversy, maybe you're not trying to create controversy, but what's going on? You said deliverance or whatever. With like the criticisms, either from your friends or whatever. I kind of asked it, but I know that you answered it in the sense of, does any of that stuff get to you, and how do you process? I think that's one of the hardest things for some individuals is doing what you're doing, where you live in this world where it's like your friends, kind of more like a journalist in that way. I don't know if you view yourself in some regards as a version of that for the world and the church world, but in journalism, you could be a friend of mine or not. I'm going to give when it's true journalism, not like the modern day ones, but it's like, hey, whether you're my friend or not, I have a responsibility to I feel like a responsibility to help people navigate thinking through these things. Like, are you really good at brushing off, being able to separate what you feel like you kind of feel called to do through your space and the feelings of those that may affect someone that I may intentionally or unintentionally know that it's going to kind of be not unfortunate for them, but something they're not a fan of?
In terms of if I have to say something,
if you're speaking about either something
about a friend,
not really either a friend or it's something that they still believe and they're going to feel like, oh, it's stepping on their toes. Because it's like, I mean, the friends you have are going to be high profile. People are going to say, hey, is Ruslan talking about you? Is this, and so you're like,
yeah, no, I think in that regard, I would like to believe that, one, I would give them the benefit of the doubt and let them chime in on whatever we're talking about. Two, if they can't or they're busy and I have to address something, which honestly hasn't really happened. I mean, I'll give you a practical example of a way it has, but I'm going to be gentle and delicate enough where they're not usually going to be offended by it, or I'll give them a heads up. And then three, the issue isn't the friends. The only issue that frustrates me is when people are like intentionally misunderstanding, right? So I'll give you a very practical example. So I just did George Janko's podcast, and George Janko kind of crashed out on the Catholics and the Orthodox.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen like crazy.
Yeah, I got a lot of Catholic and Orthodox friends. I don't know of a single Protestant creator who has platformed more Catholic and Orthodox creators, like consistently interviewing priests and interviewing their apologists. So then when I'm in a 3-hour conversation, spending the majority of the time George is talking about these people, defending them, and yet those people will still come after me for letting him process whatever his questions are. Yeah. That to me is frustrating. That to me is like, come on.
Because what would they have expected? That you just shut it down? Or that, like, what?
There's a philosophical frustration with the moment. You're going to have this Christian Avengers podcast. Okay, first of all, we're not. Stop being so hyper literal and myopic. Like George's, it's a play on words. He got his friends together that are Christian creators, and he thought it'd be fun to call it the Christian Avengers. Well, why weren't no Catholics there? Well, why weren't no deliverance ministries there? Well, why no Orthodox there? Well, why no?
George is just unaware of what's going on in the world or
and
whatever.
It's not that deep. It's just a fun title for a fun podcast with him and everyone there who he has a relationship with. Not it's supposed to be symbolic of every pocket of the Christian YouTube. So there's that, and then there's already a I can't believe that you guys are going to call yourself the Christian Avengers, and it's like you're taking this way too seriously. And then two, it's like why not have a Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox? It's like maybe because he's not in a relationship with any Catholic or Eastern Orthodox people, and he's externally processing his thoughts, and we are there to have a conversation and do our best to answer those questions in real time in the moment. When that gets misconstrued, and it's seldom by my actual Catholic creator friends, like it's seldom a voice of reason, it's seldom a Trent Horn, it's usually like the folks in their stratosphere in the online world that will then take the most bad faith approach and not just throw George under the bus just for asking questions and saying, and the whole thing opens with, if someone can show me in the Bible that I'm wrong, but I don't see how you do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And then everyone there is like thrown under that same bus. So that to me, I think is a bit, it doesn't make that community look good. And I told him that. Like, this is not how you persuade George. And like, I'm one of your guys' biggest allies. Like in the Protestant world, like there's nobody that's going to steelman you guys and try to defend you guys more than me and maybe Gavin Ortland and a handful of other people, while still respectfully disagreeing. And so I think that the all or nothing thinking, it's not just Catholics and Orthodox, there's a lot of all or nothing thinking in every church, every church stream, but the all or nothing thinking and then the guilty by association fallacy it could get exhausting.
For sure.
Yeah.
In that same regard, that's why I was going to ask about that in the Christian Avengers, podcast and everything like that. Do you personally feel like there's not like you said the perfect point, which is like no one's calling us the 6 or 7 most influential voices of all of Christianity, but more so one guy with one platform who's bringing friends on who all happen to be content creators for the most part as well. Like, do you personally feel like a responsibility through your voice of like, man, I got to really go in on things, very sober-minded. I got to really go in things and make sure I'm abundantly clear because I know like what happens when I talk. Same way it's like, for me, this podcast is nowhere near any of those individuals. But when I go on a platform on Sunday, like I'm fully aware, which a lot of people come to me at times, they go, how come you don't talk about this stuff in your sermons like you do on the podcast? And I'm like, well, because I know how valuable my voice is the moment I go behind that podium. And also, I'm called to bring the word of God, not talk to you about what's going on in Target. That's at least I don't feel that responsibility. So in your sense, though, a lot of this is connected to what God is really calling you to and build your voice for more of a national and probably global outlook. Like, do you feel that responsibility?
No, you don't. You don't, because you're going into someone's home and you're talking amongst friends, you're not thinking the video is going to do 1 million views in 4 days. If we were to be sitting down in front of 1 million people right now, this conversation would go totally different.
Yeah.
So you can't even quantify. Like, I can't even quantify that my worst videos, like videos that I'm like, this video is a disaster. I'm so sad right now. This is a 10 out of 10 on YouTube. Like a bad video hits 10,000 people. I can't even quantify what that means to sit and talk in front of 10,000 people in person. Right. So no, I don't think that your brain can accurately understand the weight of what you're saying in the ripple effects and how different people are going to hear it differently. And I don't know if there's any degree of digital prep that you can do in a situation like that outside of just, Lord, take the wheel. And hopefully I don't fumble and say something crazy and I can go back and look back at that car, and everyone's mad about that car. It's not just the Catholics and Orthodox,
right?
To respect it. Everyone. It's like I got folks that are like, "You're too soft on sin. You're pushing OSAS." It's like the whole first half of the conversation is saying what happens if someone's struggling with sin and they can't shake it and they know it's wrong. And I tell them like the discipline of God is scary. Like don't be in that situation. Like literally.
Yeah.
And then I'm giving people practical steps on how to overcome addiction, right? So like that community thought I was like too soft on sin. The Eastern Orthodox are here. Then there's a general guys that like, why wasn't my guy there? So everyone's mad about that conversation.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking about that. Like no one's going into a conversation thinking about all these things. It's like, oh, my buddy George wanted to have all this together. This is cool. All of our schedules can align because everyone's moving around.
Yeah.
And let's just have a good faith conversation and let the chips fall where they may. That was honestly the intent. Now, also, at the same time, those conversations aren't scripted. So we had one question, which is like, what has God been showing you? Come prepared to share what God has been showing you. That was the last question of the conversation. And even that was framed a little different, which is like, what have you been struggling with? The rest that we didn't know anything that we were going to talk about, So, and that's not on George because not a lot of people. You didn't provide me a list of questions. We just kind of went in, and are having a conversation. So, I think the internet is interesting in that like this is not a sermon. This is not a lecture. This is not. I'm not at a symposium with an outline.
Yeah,
we're having a conversation.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a conversation you may misspeak. Sometimes in a conversation, like I'll give you an example. In that conversation, so I have a lot of Eastern Orthodox and Catholic people that watch my channel. I said in that conversation, I think even Catholics and Orthodox can be saved and be Christian. And
people are going to lose their mind off
People
that.
are like, what do you mean by even?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, back the clip up a minute. George is talking about people who are worshiping idols. So nominal Catholics and nominal Orthodox that perhaps don't understand that these are windows into heaven and we believe that the presence is really there. George is talking about nominal Catholics that would appear like they're worshiping inanimate objects. Now, I understand there's a theology you guys have for it, but I'm talking about people that could be idol worshipers. I'm saying even those people can go to heaven. Even the most nominal Catholics and Orthodox who may be seemingly worshiping idols can go to heaven. But someone will clip and be like, what do you mean by even? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I mean that I believe you guys are saved, and I've had dozens of you guys on my channel. I don't think you're idol worshipers. I say that in the clip, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about.
So when you get the feedback, are you like, when you're aware of how people are feedback you to, is it because you read comments or?
No, well, yes and no. I don't read YouTube comments.
Okay.
After the first hour or two.
Okay.
Because then it just goes left.
Yeah.
I do check like Patreon, and I do have like real Catholic and Orthodox friends in my real life that I'll check in with and I'll have dialogue with. I do read probably X mentions more than I should. And X is just a nasty platform right now because people would just say the most
it's the Wild West right now.
Crazy things.
Yeah.
And so yes and no.
Yeah. What are you like? Kind of in that vein, you see some individuals, kind of in the Christian influencer space right now. It's like I've seen it right now going viral a few times, and I won't name any individuals because it's not about that. In the sense of like someone relatively gets saved. We could use George for instance because this isn't happening to him, so I think I could use him without making anyone feel bad. But it's like, let's just say George all of a sudden is thrusted and he's doing sermons at people's churches next week. And we see that's what happened in some ways with Kanye. He got super passionate and then he's like, I'm going to do Sunday services. And I know there were some falling outs between pastors at that time because they were like, that's not church. You have no elder structure. You have no accountability. You didn't go to Bible school. And he got really mad by that. And kind of one of the reasons why he got upset at Christians as a whole, the church as a whole. So like, what is your thoughts? Because I see right now a lot of individuals who are saying, hey, just because you've gotten influence and you became saved and you have this voice and all that, other churches and Christians are saying, okay, now you have something to say, come preach and teach or whatever. And either A, people aren't giving them grace to grow. We don't remember what it was like when we first got saved. Mm-hmm. And so, we just think, what are they shouldn't even be there. Listen, half of what they're saying is wrong. Well, me when I first got saved, 90% of what I was saying was wrong. But also people are saying, well, then if that's the case, they should, be like Jesus and spend time in the wilderness, be like Paul and spend 3 years with Jesus to learn and this and that. And they shouldn't do this publicly. Like, what are your thoughts being kind of an inside man, but you've had years in the church and you yourself aren't this kind of blow up influencer. You've had hard labor just like they have, but you've done it in a Christian space, hard labor, hard work. What's been your view as people are kind of making those criticisms with these influencers.
You guys ever do testimony service when you grew up in church?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Right.
back in the day. And we still do it now in other ways, for sure. Yeah.
And so like testimony service,
Yeah.
there might be somebody up there that like may have been high a few days ago.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know?
Yeah.
They're
still cussing in
or
their
they're still
testimony.
cussing in their testimony.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think testimony service is powerful. I think there's a utility for it. And I think as long as there's a distinction between, hey, we're going to have Brother Bob come up and share his testimony versus Brother Bob is going to teach a sermon today.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think if there's a distinction there, then I think we're fine. The issue is sometimes there isn't a distinction there.
Right.
And when you're dealing with high-profile people, it's like an ongoing freight train. Like, Kanye is going to do Kanye. You could be like, no. And he's going to be like, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So then you have people who get the unfortunate privilege of trying to steer that in a direction that makes sense, when really what a Kanye needs is probably to wake up in the same zip code every day for a year straight, get in his Bible, go outside, touch grass, walk, get in community, Bible study, pray, work out, right? Like that's probably what a Kanye needs, but that's not, he hasn't lived like that in decades. So he's going to be moving around and doing what he's going to be doing, and he's trying to infuse his faith into that. And so, you know, his pastor, like the person that was his actual pastor, was a guy named Adam Tyson.
Right.
And he was out of
Santa Clarita.
Yeah. And Adam Tyson was like, I'm not doing Sunday services with you if they're on Sunday mornings. I'm going to go preach my church. You don't have a church. This is not a church. This is an expression thing. And so I think Adam Tyson like did the very best that he could with Kanye. Kanye is going to Kanye, you know? And so in the Christian YouTube space, I don't think anyone is looking at Russell Brand or George Janko as pastors or teachers. I think they're looking at them as, oh man, praise God, this person got saved and he's going to work this out in front of everybody. And it might be cool to have Russell Brand come up and give his testimony at testimony service. Yeah. But Russell Brand, the cool thing about a Russell Brand is that he's making a distinction in that, like, guys, I'm still new. I'm still working this out. And I'm doing it before the whole world. Most of us, to your point, have the privilege of doing it privately. So I think that's the distinction. Now, I think Kanye was in a moment where he just wanted to share. I don't think that was like malicious. I think he wanted to share. And then what happened? He wanted his marriage restored. That unfortunately didn't happen. Everything shut down with the pandemic. He ran for president, which was a terrible idea. He was isolated. And now fast forward, that gets the recipe for what many people did, like in terms of their own deconstruction journey. How many people came to faith thinking that if I just do God's laws and follow God's ways, God's going to give me fill in the blank. My life is going to be easier. How many people stopped going to church because of COVID? Yeah. Quite a few. Now, we're holding Kanye to a standard as if he's not a regular guy. Like, that dude is still a regular dude with, by the way, decades of illicit drug use, a potential misdiagnosis of bipolar with treatment for said diagnosis with the wrong medication. And he's now claiming that he has an actual diagnosis for autism. So you got illicit hard drug use. I'm not talking about smoking weed. He's done way heavier stuff than weed consistently. Someone who was diagnosed as bipolar, given medication, psych medication, and actually claims to have autism. Just that alone create, and then add COVID.
And then you add wealth to them and influence and everything else.
And you get immense access to drugs, immense access to women, immense access to anything you could ever imagine. That does nothing about that story shocks me. It's like, oh yeah, well, that's now. I'm not counting Kanye out. I don't think he's done. I don't think it's over. I think he'll come back to the faith someday. You know, I think he's still trying to grasp to parts of, even, you know, one moment he'll say, I am God. The next minute he'll say, Jesus loves me. I love Jesus. Like literally in the same days sometimes, right? So this is someone that may even be going through a psychosis or a psychotic break in real time. Or maybe just trolling, or maybe both. And we're looking at him and we're thinking like it's an indictment on the church. I don't think it's an indictment on the church. I think this is the messiness that you as a pastor probably deal with several times a year. You probably got a couple Kanyes in your church right now that were 6 months ago. They were on fire and they were trying to get up for testimony service. And now they're unfortunately relapsed and they're in a dark space.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you navigate with those? How do you navigate those people, right?
Yeah.
Well, if they don't have access to fame and fortune, they're going to hit rock bottom and likely end up back in church at some point, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Ye's display is that it's way more public and he has way more access, and it's probably going to be way harder for him and potentially more scarier for him.
Yeah, for sure.
In terms of when he actually hits rock bottom.
Yeah, that's a great take, because I see that a lot, and I see some of the younger influencers, they're being asked to, go on stages, and it's just like, I don't know how I feel about it, but it's like a lot of people are getting really hard on them, especially the younger influencers who are coming to faith, because they're the ones who will say yeah to someone's youth group or young adult group, and they ask him not just an interview on their testimony, but to deliver the word, and maybe they're like, plagiarizing someone else's sermon or using it.
I know who you're
and,
talking about. Here's the thing. And I think I know who you're talking about. We don't have to say his name.
Yeah.
But the ironic part is the person who they plagiarized was on their podcast the next week. I plagiarize my pastor all the time.
My first decade of teaching was 50% John MacArthur.
The difference is with me and my pastor is like, I'll tell him, hey, can I borrow this thing from you?
Yeah.
And he'll be like, yeah. I was like, okay, give me the synopsis of how you set this up. Oh, this is how you set this up, and I'll use something like that. And then hopefully he doesn't find it disparaging. He's used stuff that I've said before. You know what I mean? And used it so I think if you're plagiarizing someone you have relational equity with and rapport with, is that really plagiarism as a communicator? If I hear you preach something, I say, oh, bro, I like this. Can I use this for my talk here? And you might say, yeah, man, have it. It's yours. Or you might say, yeah, just give me a shout out. Or you might say no. Generally, you're not going to say no if there's a relationship there, right? Yeah. So anyway, I hear you. And I think even in that, is a youth group the same as a Sunday morning? Is a 21, 22-year-old preaching to a room full of 13, 17-year-olds to that age? Is that the same as a Sunday morning? Not quite. You know. Now, to your point, I would have preferred that they just do a panel with that person. I would have preferred they just do like a live podcast. I think that creates those safety nets and makes it feel more of I'm sharing my testimony and less of I'm now a teacher, an authority over you. Yeah.
I just think, man, we're just always ready. Because one of the things we do on our podcast is let's talk about the principle, let's talk about the idea, let's not talk about the people. It's really easy that the moment you start going to the people, you do this. You start looking at their age, start looking at their gender, you start looking at, and sometimes that's part of the conversation. But, rather than what's the principled idea, right? Which to me, the principled idea would be, is it right to plagiarize a sermon? It's you don't have to talk about, who the individual is or whatever. And like you said, the moment you start going down the stream, if people are connected to social media, they'll put together what they think they've seen or whatever. But principally in a sense for that. So for me, when I first started ministry, my weddings and funerals was my dad's script for the first 4 years. I did his exact funerals, did his that. Now you listen to mine and his wedding and funeral 14 years later, and you're like, oh, I could kind of similar, but it's about 90% different because I found my voice. Right. I found my style. Right. And I don't think a lot of us give enough grace in that sense, but also to be like, if I was mentoring a young person, I'd be like, hey, that kind of sounds like TD Jakes. Let's try to add a little bit more of your voice in there, and I think you're good. You can still take his points. I think you're still learning, but let's not, reference his wife as if it's your wife or something, something silly. Yeah. Let me ask you one more question, and then we could land the plane. Is you're kind of aware of the grand scheme of what's going on in the faith. What's going on, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, deliverance streams, non-denominational streams, everything in between. What do you think? A lot of people who listen to us are completely new to their faith. They just, no one has walked with them. They're learning, they're DMing us saying I never even knew where to even buy a Bible, or what to read in it or whatever. So that's a lot of our people. And so exposing them to what's going on around in the world, what do you think would be if someone was interested, what's going on in Christianity in the world? And I'll use an example, and hopefully your mind will connect with it. What are some things that you would say, hey, look at this. This is pretty interesting what's happening in kind of the global sense of the faith. I think what's really unique is what's happening with Wes Huff and being on Rogan, and kind of it seems like there's been this beautiful resurgence of apologetics and intellect with our faith. And that's been really cool to see over the past 90 days, 4 months or whatever. any Christian I talk to or someone even open to Christianity, I'll kind of be like, hey, check out this podcast, because that kind of seems to be an open door. Check out, Wes was on Rogan. If you're completely unaware of what's going on in our faith, it's kind of cool thing that you could check out. Are there any other kind of things that you would think in that kind of realm that you would tell someone, check these things out? These are pretty cool.
There's a lot. I think what's happened right now is we've came to the conclusion that secular materialism or new atheism or whatever you want to call it has not worked. And I think society as a whole is kind of like, hey, when you remove God, something is going to fill that void. And it'll be leftism or wokeism or cultural Marxism, whatever you want to call it, or it'll be flat out hedonism and or nihilism, or like what we are seeing in Europe and specifically in the UK, like Islam. Like something is going to replace that void. Something is going to fill that. And so I think people have come to the conclusion that you can't just take God out of stuff. So I think this is the first time society as a whole is saying we are not for atheism. Like atheism, bad. Right? Like I think that's like unanimous. Now that creates an intriguing moment within history. Some people would say there's a vibe shift that's happened. Some people will say that the re-election of Trump is an indictment on that whole paradigm of leftism, secular, secular materialism, cultural Marxism, whatever. The issue with that though is then we can easily slide into we're not atheists, but we also don't want to be Christless conservatives either. And so I think it's this pivotal moment where people are trying to sort out who are we as a nation, who are we as the West, and what is the bedrock of our civilization. And it can't just be that the left is bad. We all agree, like left bad, gender affirming care bad, wokeism, like we get it. But there has to be a better story presented. There has to be better culture being built. Can't just be that they're bad. Okay, cool. Now what? Right? And if there's not a biblical framework, if the gospel doesn't become the cornerstone of our society, it'll just slide into something else weird, and whether that's authoritarianism, I don't know. And so I think we're in this unique spot where Bible sales are up year over year. I'm sure you know this.
Record right now.
The number 3 show on Amazon Prime is The House of David, which is a show by my friend John Irwin about the life of David. The Chosen just signed a massive deal with Amazon Prime. So we have Christian media bigger than it's ever been. We have the biggest podcasters platforming Christians, Joe Rogan, Wes Huff, to your point. We have Bible sales up. There's now starting to be data coming in. In France, specifically, there's a massive resurgence and an increase in attendance in the Catholic Church. Young men with Eastern Orthodoxy. I think we're going to start seeing data if it hasn't already happened. I'm hearing many churches have already rebounded beyond their pre-pandemic numbers, right? So whatever the 2019 numbers, I think churches are increasing that generally over year. And so there seems to be a massive, dare I say, revival moment. Now, the question is, now what do we do with that, right? And I don't think what we do with that is go, cool, like, we got our Saul and President Trump. And now,
we made it.
Right, we made it. It's
it.
like, no. The revival is not going to happen in arenas or in mega churches or in crowds. The revival is going to happen in circles and in community doing life on life. And I think if people got a hold of that and said, okay, it is not my job or your job to digitally disciple people. Like, I think that's goofy in general. Like discipleship happens life on life. It doesn't happen over a screen. Information can be transferred over a screen. We can teach over a screen. You can get incredible teaching and Bible translations in the Greek and the Hebrew over a screen. But you can't disciple people over a screen.
For sure.
Right? So then that positions the new believer and the seasoned believer to go, okay, there's people coming back to church. Who's going to disciple them? You as a pastor can't disciple the whole church.
Right.
Ephesians 5 talks about that the apostles and the prophets and the pastors or the teachers, that they are to equip the saints for the work of ministry. So it's the saints, like it's the regular Christians that are supposed to be doing the work of the ministry. So I think there's a huge opportunity that if you're a seasoned believer, you've been walking with Jesus for a while, I think revival is here. We can call it revival. We can call it awakening, whatever you want to call it. The data is starting to suggest that. I think once you Gallup, my guess is Gallup will come out with numbers, and we'll see an increase in church attendance within 2025, 2026. But who's going to shepherd and disciple all these people? It can't be guys over screens.
Yeah.
It can't be the pastor trying to disciple 1,000 people or 100 people. It has to be the people who take ownership of their faith and goes, I am going to do life on life with people. I'm going to open up my home. I'm going to build bigger tables.
Yeah.
I'm going to disciple people. I think if that happens, then we'll see the compound effect of that. I think it's already happening, but I want people to get a hold of that. And the best way to disciple people is to do life with people and to have your life in order.
Yeah.
Right? Jordan Peterson has this rule: don't criticize the world if you haven't cleaned your room first. So we could talk about the world, but it's like, is our house in order? You know, is our home in order? And if it is, or at least we're intentional enough to start making it be in order, then man, goodness, what a massive opportunity we have right now for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And I don't know about here in your church, in our church, the biggest demographic we're seeing come to faith is like the nuns in their 30s and 40s, people that have had no religious background, never went to church, and they're in their 30s and 40s, and they're married with kids, and they're like, I can't do it on my own anymore. I need Jesus. And okay, who's going to disciple those people?
For sure.
Who's going to do life with those people? Because they're messy.
Oh yeah, they're messy. They don't know. I've had people come up to me. You know, 60-year-old came up to me last year, and she was mad at me because she said I was talking about Jesus the whole time, and when was I going to start talking about God? And I was like, man, you know, Jesus is God. She was like, no way, no way. And I'm like, yes. And I taught her who the Trinity was, and she was like, I probably sound so stupid to you. I said, no, you sound hungry to me. Like,
we're so glad you're here.
I'm glad you're asking that question, you know. And another girl last year, she came up and she said, hey, I love everything you're doing. I love everything you're teaching. But all those guys' names that you keep referencing, like, who are they? Where do you... And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like that guy, John, she said, it was like, you read the verse. She's like, which I know is from the Bible, but like, where do I find those guys' books? And I was like, oh, the Bible's 66 books. And she was like, no, it's one book. And I was like, no, it's, and she was in her 30s. And I mean, it's beautiful. I'm like, because we're used to the cultural Christian who comes in and they did Sunday school until they were 15. And so, you know, they're like, I got this. I know it. I could start giving relatively fast. And I get it. You want me to be in a small group, and I get it. You want me to get my marriage right. And it's like, but I have people that are coming to faith who are still having threesomes, you know, with their spouse and their friends because they just never, so they're saved. Like they're saved, they're serving. And then one day it just comes out that, you know,
they're in a throuple.
And you're like, and you're like, wait.
God bless them.
You know, you're like, wait, you know.
You can't do that.
And they're like, really?
Yeah.
They're like, I felt like it was wrong, but so to your point, like, you do have to start discipling at a new level when you pray for revival, and if the Lord brings it, and if it's people that have never found themselves in church or they only have when they were 8 and it was Catholic and they've never been in again, or they're revisiting Catholicism again or whatever, if there's no on-ramp, you know, like was truly in the early church when the Apostle Paul is trying to help the Greeks like understand, and you have Galatians because the Judaizers are coming in and trying to teach the Greek. No, you got to go get circumcised again. If that individual, I feel like most of the time we've been talking to right now Jewish Christians, which is just like Christians who grew up in Christianity. They understand how it rolls. They went wayward for a little bit and then they came home. Rather than the people we have coming to church now are Greeks who are like completely
full-on pagans.
Like full-on pagans. They don't know if they're pro-abortion. They don't know if they're affirming. They don't know if they're like, but I think I love Jesus and I believe in what he's doing, but what am I supposed to think about all these other hinge things? And then that's now where the real discipleship is coming in to be like, hey, you can't sleep with your stepmom. You know, like in 1 Corinthians, it's like, hey, love that you're loving Jesus, but like, you can't be doing that. It's like, oh, really? Like, really. You can't, you know.
That's good.
But you can eat food sacrificed to idol as long as it doesn't offend a brother. It's like he's laying out the script to be like, here's what it means to walk with Jesus. And so
that's a great observation.
I think
Thank you for sharing that too. That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, means the world that you took the time to drive up here.
Thanks for having me.
Can you just, before we close, can you share about Blessed God Summits coming up? And I know I'm out of town because my brother's birthday, but I would highly encourage anyone who listens to this. Some people
you guys,
in our community
sponsored and got some tickets though.
We did.
Thank you.
We sponsored tickets.
Yeah. So Blessed God Summit, March 27th, 28th, 29th. So we're laying out this framework of first apologetics and worldview. So not just apologetics in the sense of like the defense of the faith, but also worldview, identity. We have J. Warner Wallace. We have Dr. Sean McDowell. We have some amazing speakers, Pastor Daniel Golding, who just planted Echoes Church in Arizona. And so that's day one. We're talking about apologetics and worldview. Day two, we start getting into the home. We start getting into family. We get into marriage. We get into being single. We get into fitness, and we get into finances. So now we're going from worldview to virtue. So we're not just talking abstract ideas and theology and beliefs. Now those ideas have to impact the virtues you're building. You have to be building virtue across your life. And then we go from virtue to then going out into the marketplace. So then day three, we have Dallas Jenkins, who's the creator of The Chosen. We have Nick D, who's a massive independent artist. We have Ryan Pineda, who's built an incredible portfolio of businesses and real estate.
Out in Vegas.
We have other creative people. A lot of Christian YouTubers are coming. They're going to talk about building YouTube. We got Lila Rose, who built one of the biggest pro-life organizations called Live Action. And so we're going to say, okay, so from a healthy worldview, we build personal virtue. As we build personal virtue, how do we then go out into the marketplace and either build that ministry, that business, that nonprofit, that music career, that YouTube channel, that podcast from practitioners?
Yeah.
We don't have professors that have never built anything or folks who are no. These are people that have built it and are building it at an elite level. So you want to get into film? Great. Dallas Jenkins is going to be there telling you how they built The Chosen and how you build something like that today. Yeah. Right. And that I think is going to be super, super valuable for the dreamer, for the person that's like, man, I feel like there's something more. Great. I believe there's something more for you, but you can't get the sequence wrong. Yeah. You can't not have your worldview in check and not build virtue and then go try and build the ministry or the business or the thing. It'll wreck you. Yeah. So let's get it in the proper sequence, in the proper order.
Man, that's incredible. For someone coming from the church world, there's not a lot of intentionality to that layers. From churches or anything, and not good, bad, or indifferent. So I was bummed when you first sent me the link. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gone for my brother's birthday on this.
Well, there's a virtual ticket. Well, then so you can watch it. We'll get you the virtual ticket and you can watch it. Okay, perfect. Because I
am highly passionate, interested with every layer of that. I mean, that's the whole premise of what we talk about on here. And so, I can highly encourage. You're not going to get this. This isn't just like, oh, any church does a conference. This is the kind of stuff you get, or no, it's so layered so perfectly. And so they just go to blessedgodsummit.com or
blessedgodsummit.com. Yeah, so there's a virtual ticket that they can bundle up with some different merch, like our devotional, 60-day devotional. They can bundle that up with a virtual ticket. Or if they want a physical ticket, go to blessedgodsummit.com. There's a button for a physical ticket. And if they can't afford it, they can apply for a scholarship. And if they're local, we're giving out a lot of scholarships. You sponsored some
we got
tickets.
10 scholarships.
So we've been giving out folks because we want, it's a $300 conference, which is a heavy lift for a young family.
But it is a heavy lift. But for everything you named, me even thinking if I was putting on, because we do a conference annually, but with as many people as you shared, I'd be like, oh, that's like, it's like a $400 or $500 ticket.
I would like to think so, but our audience is younger, and so we're like, man, let's price it competitively, but at the same time, let's create on-ramps for people that I just can't swing $300 plus hotel plus flights. Yeah. Okay, sweet. We'll figure out a way to get you a ticket and just get yourself there. You know?
And so it's happening in San Diego County. Was it Chula Vista?
Carlsbad, North County,
right.
San Diego. So not quite, not Chula Vista. Chula Vista is near Tijuana.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking of Carlsbad. I knew it was one of the C's. Yeah.
Carlsbad's really nice.
It's gorgeous.
It's in North County, San Diego. So it's about 50 minutes north of San Diego Airport, about 60 minutes south of Orange County Airport, about 90 minutes south of LAX. Yeah,
it's about, I think it's like an hour and 10 from where we're at. So if anyone's in our community, it's easy. We go to the little Carlsbad RV, like right by the beach. Me and my wife take our RV right there. It's the best. So we love Carlsbad. Man, thank you so much for being on.
Man, thanks for having me. This is great.
Really means the world. You took the time to drive out. It was a big day. Everybody came because it was a big day that you were here. And so normally we film on Thursdays. So we already filmed like 3 episodes yesterday. So you were the icing on top.
Praise God.
Appreciate it. All right, everybody. Thanks. God bless.
Peace.